Well, I guess I will kick it off now that it's officially 2 p.m. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Advertising Club in Baltimore, also known as the AAF, I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar. I'm Kara Ullman, programming for the AAF, and I am very excited to introduce our guest panelists, David White and Dana White. You may be wondering if it's simply a coincidence that they share the same last name, but no, it's not. They are, in fact, brother and sister, and they both have fascinating backgrounds and work experience in both marketing and communications. Today, they're here to share their insights and perspectives into the ever-changing automotive industry. If you're in advertising in the Baltimore market, you may already know David White. He's a seasoned advertising executive and leader in the region. His career started several years ago at Zimmerman Ad Agency, and then he went on to spend 4 years at Eisner. After Eisner, he became a managing partner at Exit 10, a Baltimore ad agency that specializes in the transportation industry, and he worked there for over a decade. He is now the president of Juno Collective, a boutique agency that partners with brands across industries, ranging from government clients to quick serve and automotive. We are also thrilled to welcome his sister, Dana White, who is the Chief Communications Officer for Hyundai Corporation. You all know Hyundai brand, but what you may not know is that Dana is their first ever Chief Communications Officer. Her background is extremely impressive. She has worked for US President, various US Senators, 4-star generals, and the CEOs for 3 Fortune 500 companies. Did I also mention that she speaks Mandarin? I mean, this woman's unbelievable. Anyway, thank you both for your time, and without further ado, I will turn it over to David and Dana.
Well, Kara, first of all, thank you very much for that introduction and having Dana and I. We both feel privileged and honored to be with everyone today. And I think we're happy that everyone's joining us for this discussion on challenges and opportunities facing the automotive industry. I think our goal today is to, hopefully give everybody a little bit of knowledge about the auto industry and how it's evolved. I think we're going to have a wide-ranging discussion. I think we're going to cover everything from some of the turmoil we're seeing in our country to electric vehicles to the opportunities we think some of these challenges are presenting to the industry. What I hope is that the takeaway is that everybody gets a little bit of a 101 in the automotive industry, and that you can take something of value away to your lives and your careers. And, maybe if you aren't in the automotive sector yet, that, you might find an opportunity there that might be career enhancing for yourself. As Kara said, Dana is my younger, more capable sister. We both grew up in Charlottesville, Virginia. And we've spent a number of years working in the automotive industry for probably the past 20 years. And Dana and I will both take you through our bios as we get to talk. We're going to talk a little bit. I'm going to advance the slide. If we don't cover something that you guys want to discuss, or if there's something in the Q&A we don't get to you, we've given you our contact information here. Feel free to reach out to us. We're both passionate about the business. So we'll try to answer any questions that get missed, or if something just pops into your mind after our talk, just feel free to reach out to us and we'll try to get back to you as soon as we can. For today, we're going to talk a little bit about the automotive industry, past and present. We're going to talk about some of the challenges and what we see as opportunities facing the industry. Dana is going to talk a little bit about what Hyundai is up to now that she's about 4 months in, and then again, we'll open the floor up for questions. Kara did a great job talking a little bit about our bios, but again, I'm managing partner of Juno Collective here in Baltimore. I've worked in a number of shops and a lot of brands. I've worked from owning my own agency to agencies like Zimmerman & Partners, which in 1995, I cut my teeth in automotive. And then I've worked on, obviously, some Fortune 500 brands like McDonald's, General Motors, Toyota, and CSX Railroad. And then most recently, our largest client at Juno is aerospace and defense giant General Dynamics, who makes the Virginia-class nuclear submarines, as well as the Gulfstream jets that are very popular in pop culture. So that's a little bit about me. I'll turn the floor over to Dana, and then we'll get into the meat of our presentation today.
Well, thanks, David, and thanks, Kara and Matt, and thank you all for tuning in today. Really appreciate it, and I hope everyone is safe and healthy. The first thing I just want to say is I've been very blessed to have an incredible background and have incredible opportunities, but I just want to say that I really couldn't have done any of it. I am the baby of the family. If it weren't for the incredible brothers that I have, not just one, I have two fantastic brothers who have always supported me. And so I appreciate David opening up this opportunity for me as well, as he has many times before. David gave me my first job delivering newspapers when I was like 5. So we've been good buddies always. I've worked in a lot of different industries. I've gone back and forth between policy and PR. The most important thing to me is I'm passionate about issues, I'm passionate about leaders, and I'm passionate about causes and things that really matter. So I started my career on Capitol Hill as a press secretary. I went on to be a publicist at Fox News Channel. And I went from there, I went into the administration and worked Taiwan. I was a Taiwan country director. And then I found myself at the Wall Street Journal. I worked in New York on the editorial page. And then they moved me to Hong Kong. So I spent about a year in Hong Kong, which David moved me to Hong Kong as well. So I spent some time there, came back, got back into politics, working for Senator McCain. Fast forward, I had an opportunity to go to the Renault-Nissan Alliance. I worked for Carlos Ghosn, who was CEO of Nissan and Renault. And so I moved to Paris. I was his primary English language speechwriter and director of policy for the Alliance, and spent 3 years there. Came back, started my own shop, named after our grandfather's address back in Charlottesville, 1055 Grady, and then got recruited by the administration when they named Secretary Mattis as Secretary of Defense. So it was an incredible opportunity. Secretary Mattis, when he resigned, I was effectively his mouthpiece. So I decided it was best to exit stage right with him. And so so it's strange that life would bring me back to automotive because I had such an incredible experience being both in a Japanese company and a French automaker. And now for me to be in a Korean automaker, I feel like I've come sort of full circle. So I started here in 1st of April. I knew the CEO from our time at Nissan, and he had a big vision for where Hyundai can go. And so he created the first chief communications officer, and I have oversight over Mexico and Canada, as well as all of our affiliates, Hyundai Capital, the DC office, Mobis, which is our parts affiliate, as well as our manufacturing in Alabama, which is about 3,000 people. Then we also have Globus, which is our logistical arm. So that's all a part of the North American footprint. So with that, I will stop and let David launch into the presentation. I'm really looking forward to your questions.
I learned early on that it's always important to go first when talking about bios and resumes, but before Dana, because afterwards it's like, no, mine pales in comparison. But for today, what we're going to talk a little bit about is the automotive industry. I think we're going to try to share some insights. As we alluded to, some of our insights come from a recent road trip Dana and I did. So when Dana got the job at Hyundai, she had to relocate to Southern California. We decided to drive together, and Hyundai was gracious enough to give us a brand new Palisade to make the trip. So we drove out together, and then I spent, I guess, about a week helping her get settled, and then I drove back. So some of the insights that we'll share today come from our journey together across country. But for now, I'm just going to give you kind of a 101 on the auto industry. There are a couple of salient points I'd like to touch base, but you may or may not know, but over 10 million people in our country are employed by the auto industry, and that includes not just the dealer and the manufacturers, but obviously suppliers that work with the industry. The industry generates nearly $1 trillion to our GDP and to our country in total revenue. That spending is projected to grow to $1.3 trillion by 2023. And just to put that into perspective, it is second only to the healthcare and drug industry. So it is a major contributor to our nation's economy. I don't know how much you've followed the automotive industry over the years, but it is a very dynamic and ever-changing one. But in 2020, only 2 of the top 10 manufacturers in our country are actually American, and they are GM and Ford. There are other players, and this is in terms of market share of vehicles produced, but there are others like Tesla per se, but they don't produce a large number of vehicles. But that has changed since when I was a kid, our grandfather, their parents, where American manufacturers that were actually owned by American companies was probably 6 or 7 out of the top 10. So it just shows you how much the industry has changed. We thought it was important to give you a sense of actually how many cars are produced by the auto industry each year, dating back, we took 1990, and you can see here on our chart that, you know, in the early 90s, the country produced somewhere between 13 and 14 million cars. It has grown. Obviously, there have been some bumps and bruises along the way with recessions, which when I got out of college, there was one, and obviously we had the Great Recession in 2008. But we wanted to show you this chart to show you how resilient the industry is, and the fact that even when it does have a downturn, it fairly quickly bounces back. And what we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years is an elevated level of production at above 17 million. And it's been that way for a few years. I think we took a small decline under to 16.9 million in 2018, but it is very strong. And even after the recession, you can see the growth that has occurred. I think what I also wanted to show was that COVID, obviously, which is one of the big issues our nation is dealing with right now, has probably going to impact our industry to the point of 13 to 14 million vehicles produced in 2020, which takes us back to that early 1990s level. But again, I think everybody, myself and Dana included, know that the industry will eventually bounce back. And whenever there's turmoil, pain, there's usually opportunity. One other item we wanted to show you, just to show you how dynamic the industry is if we go back 10 years to 2010, Toyota by far was the world's most valuable automaker by market cap. And so what I mean by share price. And so it was a company that was valued at about $200 billion. During that year, 2010 in January, Tesla did its IPO and quickly became the 3rd most valuable company. But I think it's very interesting that in our lifespan, some of the largest companies that we've been familiar with, the GMs and the Fords, have become smaller players in terms of market valuation. If we fast forward just 10 years, we see what's happened on the electrical vehicle and Tesla story. I mean, if you've picked up a newspaper in the last month, week, few days, you've seen that Tesla has quickly become, running away with it, the most valuable car company in the world. And it's even outdistanced Toyota by about $100 billion. And just to put that in perspective, Toyota sold 10.6 million vehicles globally in 2019, and Tesla just 367,000. So Elon Musk's story of a green future and telling a story to its consumers that, you know, you can spend a little bit more on a car if you care about climate change and leaving the world a better place, then it is resonating, right? And it's not only resonating with its customers, but it's also resonating with Wall Street. So that story is by no means finished. We'll see how it plays out, but it just shows you what disruption and how dynamic the auto industry has been in just what has been 10 years. I think what we also want to talk a little bit about, because we're all marketers or communication experts on this call for the most part, is that the automotive ad spend. So as many of you may know, the automotive industry generates some of the largest ad dollars in our industry. In just 2019 alone, the industry spent $18 billion on advertising. Most of those dollars went to TV, but we are seeing from a percentage basis, a great increase in digital media. And I think the old adage of, 50% of my advertising doesn't work, I just don't know which 50% that is, it holds true. And I think dealers and manufacturers are looking for ROI and accountability for their marketing dollars. And I think digital media is providing that. So that's why I think you see the accelerated move from television into digital. I think some good news for the automotive industry is what we're seeing is that most major US brands are actually increasing their ad spend during COVID, which seems a little bit antithetical, but I think the strategic play is that the market will rebound, it is resilient, and that these manufacturers are trying to capture market share for when the inevitable rebound comes. So I think there's a good story. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but for now, I'm going to turn it over to Dana, and she'll tell you a little bit about the exciting things that Hyundai has in store over the next couple of months and years.
Thanks, David. So one story I did want to just share that gave me a really good impression of the company that I'm now working for, especially driving across country with David during a pretty tumultuous time. David and I, the first day we drove to St. Louis, and we were diverted by the protesters. And then the next morning, we woke up to the fact that the riot, they had torn up St. Louis. I think 4 police officers had been shot. And so one of the things that concerned me most about driving across country was, we had a car that didn't have either of our names associated with the registration, which made me very nervous, to say the least, especially with David coming back by himself. And so I called, I think at early that morning, and within an hour, Washington, D.C. and LA had gotten me paperwork that showed David's name and my name on the registration. And there were so many things that Hyundai did right for me when I just came in, but that was the greatest indication of their character and who they are as a company, that they took care of me, they took care of my concerns quickly and without hesitation. And that's from the top to the bottom. And so I'm just really proud to be working for a company that is, who does more than, it's all about what we do. So in telling the Hyundai story, in terms of where we've been, Hyundai, I know for me, when Hyundai first came on the scene, and many might not know, it actually came on the scene in 1967 with the Pony, and it was a joint venture with Ford. And then it came full steam to the US market in 1986 with the Excel. And I remember the Excel, and many of you may have remembered the Excel. It was probably in the same class as Yugo back then. And there was a quality issue. And that was its past. But if you know and understand Hyundai, to Americans, Hyundai is a car company, just cars. But it took going to Seoul to understand how huge Hyundai is as an industry. It's construction, it's infrastructure, it's steel, it's shipping, it's everything. Hyundai is a massive company within the globe and in Southeast Asia. But as a car company, we as an American market only knew it as the cars. One of the things that we still struggle with, one of our challenges, is that we have a brand gap. There's a gap in what people think they know about Hyundai versus the reality of the Hyundai car. And just very frankly, David and I are both have been Audi drivers for a long time. And I don't think either of us would have even thought about Hyundai if it hadn't been for this opportunity. But the experience with the car is incredible. And I also have a Genesis. So I also oversee Genesis, which is our luxury line. And Genesis won North American Car of the Year last year. We have some of the best safety. The Hyundai Motor Group had more in JD Power's IQS quality survey than any other group between Genesis and Kia and Hyundai. And just to be clear, Kia is under the Hyundai Motor Group. I don't represent Kia. It's a separate entity which we compete with. So when you think about one of the challenges we have is making sure people have the Hyundai experience and that they're introduced to our products, because they're high quality products and there's an incredible experience associated with them. But frankly, the matter, people don't know. And so in terms of where we're going and where we've been, COVID has really offered us a huge opportunity. Our profits are up. Every region for us is up. Our dealer profits are up. Net profits are up 200%. Their return on sales is up 160% over last year. So our dealers are actually making more money than the first 6 months of this year than they did in the first 6 months of last year. And that's the story that more people need to know about where we're going as a brand. Jose Munoz, who was formerly of Nissan, is an incredible leader who has really shown real leadership, not only from the business side, but also in terms of where the business is going. 1 year ago, there's a USA Today article, a little more than a year ago, that showed women, how many women were at director or higher in the automotive industry. And Hyundai and Kia had 0. Jose Munoz has been here for 1 year. He alone has increased the diversity within our company by like 400%. We have a woman who heads Mexico. We have a female CMO. We have me, and we have a Black man, a Black American who heads up sales. And so he is really leading the way, not from a diversity and inclusion, and I hope we can get into that, but from a where are markets going and what perspectives do I need to ensure that we stay viable. 85% of all decisions about cars are made by women, indirectly or indirectly. 65% of all decisions are directly made by women. For the first time in America's history, more women have driver's licenses than men. So where are we going? We are going to focus on who our customer is, who is going to buy our cars, who's going to talk about our cars, and who's going to stay with our brand. We're really focused on fuel cell leadership. Our executive vice chairman just announced that the Hyundai Motor Group is going to sell 1 million fuel cell vehicles by 2025. It's something we're passionate about. It's not going to happen. It's not an easy investment, but he's invested over $30 billion in research and development into fuel cell vehicles. So that's where we're going. That's who we are. I'm going to end it there because I really would like to hear your guys' questions. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Kara or Matt.
So we have one more portion of the meeting.
Sorry, David.
Yeah, that's all right. No, it's fine. We just going to talk about some of the challenges, and we do want to get to your questions as quickly as possible because I think that's where the interest probably lies. But I think in terms of some of these issues we're seeing, specifically COVID, it is having wide-ranging impacts on the industry as well, even though Hyundai is turning in some fantastic numbers. If you guys have looked at your insurance premiums lately, they're probably less. That's because COVID has eliminated 270 billion, that's billion, miles from our nation's roadways, and accidents have gone down. So people are driving less. But one of the big things is obviously the automotive industry is a global one. So the supply chain is global. So even if a car is manufactured in America, chances are that there are parts in that vehicle that come from Mexico, Canada, China, in some cases, Europe. And I think COVID has disrupted those supply chains. And as we discussed earlier, with so many people employed and making their living off the automotive industry, COVID will have impacts on the industry that we don't even know yet. But there are some positives which we'll get into. I think, obviously COVID, as I mentioned earlier, is going to reduce the total production of cars to probably somewhere between 13 and 14 million, which is significant. We're going to see the financial uncertainty with unemployment being so high. I mean, there's one thing that banks want more than anything else is consistency and to know that you have the ability to pay the loans back that they give you. So that could and will influence automotive lending, which we're going to see as far as a challenge to the industry. I think while Hyundai is investing in fuel cells, and that's a sizable investment they're making, one of the casualties of COVID is probably going to be R&D investment. As many of you may or may not know, one of the main reasons that you buy a new car isn't necessarily because your car doesn't work anymore, isn't functioning properly. It's because of technology. It's because you want to have this seamless experience between your phone, Apple CarPlay, you want it to work. And if you have an older car, 10 plus years, it doesn't work as well. So that usually is one of the main reasons that people exchange their cars for a new vehicle. And so we see some of that R&D that was going into creating those technology and innovations declining, which could have impacts on the industry. Some of the positives that we're seeing is this concept of fear of mass transit. Obviously, part of the reason that Dana and I drove across country as much as we wanted to be together for a month almost was because she didn't want to get on a plane. And I think that people avoiding planes as well as light rails and subways and buses in our nation's large cities was probably going to drive people to purchase a vehicle. So there could be opportunities there. I think as I drove across the country with my sister, and even when I came back, I had the opportunity to visit a lot of national parks, Sequoia, Yosemite, and some others. They were packed with SUVs, they were packed with cars, they were packed with people looking to get out of their homes. So as COVID restricts our travel to mostly domestic, I think that could present a huge opportunity to the automotive industry to sell more cars and leisure vehicles. I think one of the biggest opportunities, especially for everyone on this call, is that the automotive industry landscape is changing, right? So automotive manufacturers have even a greater need to create these authentic communications, not only with their customers, but also with their workforces. So Dana lived this, a lot on the car, but as the George Floyd death occurred, and then the Black Lives Matter movement ramped up, she fielded a lot of questions from the workforce of what is going to be our stance and what is going to be our approach and how are we going to address this and what is Hyundai going to do to make the country a better place. Now, the good news is, as Dana alluded to, is they were already doing a lot of the things. They were creating economic opportunity. And one thing Dana didn't say is that their automotive plant in Alabama employs 3,000 people, Dana, and 80% of them are African American. So they're really walking the walk and talking the talk. So I think that if you're a professional and you're looking for ways in, helping these companies communicate with their not only their customers, but also their workforces, I think could be a huge opportunity moving forward into the future. So with that, Matt, we will open the floor up to questions.
Excellent, and thank you all so much. Somebody had to send me a private message to say that I was just sitting there on the camera like an idiot as you guys were giving your presentation. So if you had that on your bingo sheet for Zoom bingo, you're welcome. We have had a couple questions come in already through the Q&A. We'll start with Tina's first. She said, I am finding that with my clients' car dealerships, new car inventory has decreased because of supply, and my most successful dealers are focused on buying people's cars and selling their trades and used car sales. Is that a trend anyone else is seeing across the country? And in addition, do you think online retailing will increase post-COVID for factory dealerships in a caravan type format?
So I'll address that because I have a real world example of what that is. And so the supply is tight, and so dealers don't have supply. And one of the most interesting things I saw from the road was, as I was traveling through the Midwest, I literally saw miles and miles and thousands of siloed car carriers. So I worked in the railroad industry for a number of years, and so to see that, it basically meant that manufacturing was slowed and there wasn't the production that was there. And so the other side of that is, you're 100% correct. Dealers are basically turning their attention, because they can't get the product they want and need, that the customers want, to used cars. So the Palisade that Dana and I had, we put about 10,000 miles on it. And when I returned it to Hyundai, the gentleman told me that that car would go to auction, a closed lane auction with just dealers, and that car would probably fetch somewhere around the original list price, because demand is so high. So I do see a turn until the supply situation gets better. I do see a turn towards used, because some of that profit that Dana spoke to is being generated by pre-owned and certified pre-owned vehicles.
And I would also address digital retailing. I think it's going to continue to become more popular. We have almost 100% of our dealers have gone digital. Depending on how long we don't have a vaccine, I think you can expect that digital retailing drop off and pickup will continue to be something that dealers have to embrace.
And that was from Tina. I just saw in the notes. So Tina and I worked together for a number of years down in South Florida. So hi, Tina.
Our next question comes from Brian Williams. Thanks for joining us, Brian. It's rare that we get an NBC anchor attending these things, but what is your outlook on the remainder of third and especially fourth quarter sales, especially on sales, inventory, and manufacturer programs? I think that this is a perfect tee up from the previous question.
Dan, I'll share that one.
Listen, we at Hyundai, we feel very confident about where we're going. Listen, we think there's pent up demand. We're looking at what the government decides to do with this next stimulus package. We've been of the mindset that if you energize the auto industry, you energize the economy. But we are hopeful and optimistic about where we're going. We have a lot of reserves for our Genesis. We're launching our GV80, our first SUV for Genesis. So we're hopeful. And what I will also say about Hyundai is, I think the best way to determine the strength of a company is not how it does in the good times, but how it does in the bad times. And so the fact that our dealers' profits are up, that we've done more in this environment, I think bodes very well for us in the next quarter.
We have had a couple questions about current events, particularly, and you mentioned this earlier on, Dana, particularly as it pertains to equity, diversity, inclusion, the Black Lives Matter movement. Kara actually asked, with the conversation about D&I and equity finally getting that sustained attention it deserves, what is the industry going to do to recognize it and respond to it, both on Hyundai's side as well as what you're seeing perhaps in the larger industry?
So what Hyundai has done is we've expanded who we look at for suppliers and vendors. We've also ensured that we have diverse slates for jobs. I will tell you, one of the greatest challenges for diversity and inclusion is not just who's sitting at the table. One of the other issues is, who are you bringing up to be able to be qualified and be value added to the table? I I think a lot of people lose that. And I think even in the debate about where are we going as a country, we have to look at a lot of different factors about not only the opportunity, but we have to look at education. We have to look at decisions. We have to look at how do you add value to the situation. The auto industry, I would say, is pretty has been pretty isolated and secluded from a lot of change. And the fact that everyone just needs a car has probably insulated it from some of the other social changes that should have taken root maybe earlier and did in other industries. But I think you're going to see that change, one, because of COVID, and because you may have fewer people going to dealers, you actually having that experience going into a showroom. It might be much more digital. You also have a new generation who are much more comfortable with digital interactions, as opposed to people who are, 40 plus, who I want to kick the tires and look at the engine and take it for a test drive. So when we think about inclusion, and one thing we've been very active about is also, where are you looking for your talent, right? Are you creating the feeder lines for that? Are you looking at HBCUs? Are you looking at STEM programs where women are well represented? It can't just be about the end result. And I think you saw in some of the backlashes on some companies that came out, we're all for racial equality, but then people said, well, that's great that you're for it, but how many Black folks do you have in your C-suite? And it's like crickets. How many Black, and so at Hyundai, we are supremely interested definitely in diversity. Jose is committed to it, but it's diversity for the business of it, because the customer is female, right? So it's in your interest to have a couple of women who can tell you, that didn't land on my ear right, or that's not where I'm looking. I'm 18 to 25-year-old woman. I'm not looking at Motor Trend. Sorry. You got to find me. And that's what my task is.
This is along the same lines, again, kind of bridging the gap between the social impact and the financial impact. Jill asked, in light of current events, and including COVID, do you think media mixes will be adjusted specifically between traditional and digital in order to target more effectively?
David?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's what I was trying to allude to. And I think what we're seeing just from a trend is that more of these dollars are going towards digital, just because, and I know Jill as well, it's just a much more effective, measurable way. I think as dollars become more distressed, it's harder to get a hold of. I think that dealers are probably some of the most, if I spend $1 with you, I expect at least 3 to 5 in return. And I think that digital just allows a better story to tell on whether your campaign or your thoughts were effective or not. So I definitely see digital accelerate. It's so funny, and it's just an anecdote, is that after I did this tour and I posted things about driving this Palisade, and I definitely put some things out on social, how much I got tracked on digital ads across all of my platforms, which, we're all in the business. We all understand that's how it works, but like, I can't get away from Hyundai now. So that's not a bad thing, but I think that kind of a stickiness just really bodes well to the digital landscape and future in the auto industry from a marketing and media mix.
Again, current events are on everybody's minds right now. And I guess this is how small our ad community is, because I'm looking at the next question from B. Dwyer. I'm guessing that might be Beth. Similar to the above, is COVID affecting production of cars coming into the US? And if so, what does that look like for long-term sales? I guess from an inventory standpoint and availability standpoint and the bottom line.
So I'll tell another real story, and Dana, obviously you're closer to it than I am. So the Palisade that we drove across country is Korean made, 100% made in South Korea, and it's shipped in. And so it's a very good car, very hot car, one of their best sellers. But the dealers, to the young lady's question earlier, they can't get enough of them, right? Because they're being held up at ports. They can't get here, even though I don't necessarily know if a car transmits COVID, but they are having trouble getting product into the country. And I don't really see that abating anytime soon.
So Hyundai produces 50% of our inventory in Alabama, and 50% is imported. So we have, and because we're a South Korean company, we actually have fared quite well with respect to production. We didn't have to shut down like some of the big three, because honestly, we just cut and pasted what they did in South Korea to keep our operations going. And so we really benefited from the fact that our headquarters is in Seoul. Listen, some of the shortages in Mexico, given how Mexico has been ravaged by COVID, has had an impact. And so, you know, it's something we're managing very carefully. But again, we have a production line here. We are going to launch 2 more vehicles here soon out of Alabama. So we are fully invested in the United States. But yes, I think COVID, in terms of some of our suppliers, potentially in Mexico, and I think you see that across the industry, you know, may be affected. But I think we're managing the inventory pretty well. And I'd much rather have a greater demand for our products than less.
So you had mentioned earlier on kind of the difference in buying generations. You've got the folks who are much more comfortable online, getting to know and get educated on a particular vehicle or a set of vehicles. Then there are the ones, the stereotypical tire kickers. I think I've lived in both of those realms. I'm curious, what innovations are we seeing in the industry that will have an impact on that buying process overall? Like, are there any cool technologies, any cool experiential things, especially in light of the fact that we're all so sequestered right now, that are helping to make that experience, the car buying experience, more real and more useful?
So the car buying experience particularly, or just driving?
The car buying experience, and then I definitely have some other thoughts on the larger impact.
Well, I think in terms of, I think digital is definitely the future. Are there things that are coming? I think David, you should take it from here, but David talked about, it's the technology, right? I think you're going to see more and more partnerships between automakers and tech companies to provide the experience that people are used to having in their phone, in their car. I'd like to say that Hyundai got the top rating from JD Power on infotainment. But I think you're going to see more and more of that, because we want to create a digital experience that's seamless. So I'll let David talk to the Palisade and his Audi.
Yeah, well, no, there's definitely, from a buying experience, I think there's a mind shift that has to happen, and COVID may accelerate that mind shift. So, you know, people who are in the business or know the business, that a lot of dealers, their whole pay plans and their whole way that they make money is based on CSI, which is Customer Satisfaction Index. And a lot of that is predicated on the actual delivery of a vehicle. So the process of, here, I'm going to show you how your technology works. I'm going to show you how to drive a car. I'm going to show you how the trunk works. I'm going to show you how to, if you got groceries, you know, that whole experience. And so that's been somewhat turned on its head because of COVID. Not to say that the delivery experience can't still be some of that, but they're going to have to shift to this mindset. Because I always had this was years ago. I had a dealer group in Atlanta that I was always like, you guys should be delivering cars to people's houses. You guys should be delivering cars to their workplace, because people are busy. And it's like, no, we can't do that, because we've got a process they've got to go through at the dealership, and we've got to walk them through this, and we've got to give them their, you know, their koozie and all that other stuff. And I was like, okay, well, I think you're missing opportunity. But I think COVID is now making it so that that's going to change. And so as far as technological innovation, I mean, I have a 2012 Audi A6, right? So driving the Palisade, like, it literally, the car drives itself. I mean, if you're on a straight road, there were many times, I hope there are no law enforcement on the call, but I took my hands off and I was doing my stuff. And, you know, out west, you go through hundreds of miles without seeing another car. So the car drove itself and made it very easy. So I get back to my car, and I think one downside is it's like, it makes me a little lazy. It makes me don't not think. And so there's some of the technology that my car doesn't have that I was so accustomed to, and I just don't want to wrap myself around a tree, you know, doing something silly. But there are a lot of innovations like that are coming. I think I'm a car guy. I like driving cars, but I think that technology will come where you basically, like Tesla, you sit in the car and it'll take you where you want to go pretty easily and safely. And so it'll be interesting to see how it develops, but it's definitely going to get to be a more of a driver-less experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's as if on cue, Anita asked a question related to innovation and safety. Since you referenced technology, and I think that that's been a running theme throughout this, how do you see safety innovations influencing the industry moving forward? I mean, we've talked about kind of that autopilot component, that self-parking feature. What else?
What I will say, Dana, you're closer to it, but what I will say is that it's almost got to be a total thing, because as long as you have cars that don't drive themselves and people do have to think, and cars that do, it's going to almost take almost a whole industry changeover before I think it's truly safe. But the cars are amazing. But it was interesting as a 50-year-old drive and have driven cars, everything from 70s vehicles to now 2000s. It was very interesting to see how much the car would do itself, and I didn't trust it. Like, for Dana will tell you, the car says it drives itself. It'll keep going straight. It'll monitor the speed, and I was like, I don't trust you yet, right? So it's going to take a little time before I actually feel comfortable you drive. But after a day or two, I was like, Dana would be on a call, and I'd be checking my emails, and the car would be driving. So it was pretty cool.
We have a political. Oh, Dana, go ahead.
No. Go ahead. David covered it well. Go ahead.
You sure?
She said political, so we're going to see where this goes.
Well, no. Yeah, I love to tease it. A political question from Hal, who is, for those who don't know, Hal is the head of the AAF DC, our sister chapter, and he had a question. Has the misguided tariff policy by our current administration affected your profits, your sales, and where you're building new plants? So Hal, right for the jugular, and as usual, not pulling any punches. Thanks, Hal.
Yeah, no bias there at all. No, what I can tell you is, we have signed up. We actually just the other week were fully in compliant with the new USMCA. And like I said, our profits are up. We've gained more market share. In June, we were the only brand to gain retail market share. So, I mean, the future is bright for Hyundai. I think the opportunity that we have is also that we have competitors who are floundering a little. And so what we really need to do, which I think with Jose at the helm, and given our leadership, we've had a generational leadership change also in Seoul as well. It's like we're on the precipice of really great things. And like I said, coming out of COVID, the fact that our dealers, our network has made more money, that there's 160% return on sales for them. I think we're doing really well. Obviously, we have to watch the trade issues, no doubt. We do import 50% of our inventory from Korea, but we're pretty optimistic.
I did want to come back because Donna had a question related to technology as well, and particularly the buying experience. Do you see more of an impact from artificial intelligence, VR and AR in the buying experience for Hyundai in the future?
So that's a really good question. So, the way we work with our dealers are they're independent franchise owners, right? And so Some of it is it's a negotiation and a partnership in how we transform the buying experience. So when COVID started, I mean, we put out guidelines very quickly to our dealers about how they could do contactless pickups and deliveries and sales, and what their digital footprint could look like in order to drive traffic to sales. So yes, I think you're going to see more of that technology. However, I think it will vary, because we do have different dealers and their market and who are they selling to. So for instance, a dealer down in Florida, he generally has an older clientele. So he may not transition to AI quite as quickly as perhaps a dealer here in LA. So it'll be varied, but definitely I think as you see more, well, and then that's a whole nother conversation about the younger generation and their desire to drive, but you'll see more of it because that's just where things are going.
Moving a little bit more up the funnel outside of the buying consideration level here, Kara wanted to know, she had mentioned that you said it best, auto brands have to find me, the consumer. Mindful of this, how do you feel about bringing messaging home with magazines and layering in with AR? So it's kind of a little bit of the old, a little bit of the new, something blue, something borrowed, you know?
It's absolutely necessary. So one challenge I think the auto industry has in general is that we talk a lot to ourselves, right? So it's a lot of car enthusiasts, and that's great, but you have to open up the aperture to more people. And so, yes, I am actually all about meeting customers where they are. Hyundai is all about, from a technology, quality, engineering, we want to meet customers where they are. We are customer obsessed. If you're a young woman who's looking for her first car, then you should go get the Venue. It's super popular with 18 to 25-year-old women. I want all 18 and 25-year-old women to consider the Venue, but I have to meet them where they are. So I think, yes, you're going to see more of that. My goal is to get to more audiences and intersect their lives in different ways. So how do I get, our CMO on the daily skim? How do I get in front of women who aren't necessarily looking for a car? But mind you, I also still have to maintain the JD Powers and Consumer Reports and Kelley Blue Book, because you may find me on, Tastemade. But when you go and look and say, okay, what is this car really about? I also need the experts to say, it's a great car. I love it. I got this much mileage in the Sonata Hybrid. So it's a multi-tiered approach, but the automotive industry, I would say there's a huge opportunity to broaden our view because just very frankly, it's a very closed. Most people who stay in automotive have always been in automotive. They've been at Ford, they've been at GM, they've all been in the same box. And so having someone like myself who comes from different areas is, I think, a good thing, a refreshing that has different contexts and new contexts.
Okay, we just have time for another question or two. This one's from James Johnson from VDX.TV. With regard to electric vehicles, he believes the market share is still below 2% in the United States. What do you think is the most important factor as it relates to large-scale consumer adoption of EVs, and particularly national, state, local infrastructure projects or tax incentives, better marketing, reducing battery costs, etc.?
Well, that's a good question. And Dana, you can give the manufacturer, and I'll give a little bit of what I say. Obviously, the depressed gas prices that we're seeing right now is not doing anything for electric vehicle purchase. I think the range limitations are still, I think we still have a generation of people who just are used to and accustomed to going to gas stations. And even though, the range is good and there are places you can charge, and Tesla will tell you where your next charging station is, and most of the electric vehicles will, it just still hasn't been a wholesale adoption. I think the price point is also to a point now where they're not necessarily approachable for everyone. It's getting better. I also know that the government, and I say this a little bit just from my perspective, hasn't necessarily figured out how to incentivize people the correct way. Things come and they go, and it's not necessarily always predictable. And usually what drives, and this is what I learned from Hyundai, what drives that purchase is tax incentive. When the tax incentive is there, the cars sell. When the tax incentive isn't there, they don't, right? So that says to me that they haven't figured out the experiential puzzle yet with the car. Now, I will say that I think Tesla has, as evidenced by their market cap and what they're doing, people will buy that car at a higher price point because it says it's something about them. And I think they figured out, and they have put together, they have been losing money, but now they're putting together sequential profitable quarters. So that says to me that something's working. So I don't know what the answer is. Electric cars are clearly our future, I believe. I don't think the gasoline engine is going the way of a dinosaur just yet, but there's just a lot of unknowns that just haven't been figured out yet. And I think it's got mostly to do with the product.
I would just say that one of the challenges, I mean, we are fully committed to fuel cell leadership, but we have to do it in a responsible way and still maintaining the business. And so we've made a $30 billion research and development investment in fuel cells and hydrogen fuel cells. But David's right. Part of the challenge is buying a electric vehicle here in California is a very different option than buying it in Kansas or in Alabama. Because of the patchwork of charging stations, it just makes it more difficult to fully embrace exactly how you get to that. I think like David said, electric vehicles are the future. But again, for an automaker, you kind of have to balance it with real daily, profit and loss, as well as looking towards the future. So you'll see more from us. We have seven models that are hybrid or all electric vehicles. And so you'll continue to see more from us. Like I said, we have a goal of 1 million to sell by 2025 as a group.
Well, David, Dana, that about does it for our show. Thank you so much on behalf of AAF Baltimore, the Baltimore industry, and for the many people who joined us from all around the country. We saw a couple friends from the other side of the country. Thank you so much for joining us. I just want to let participants know we will have a recorded version of this available shortly. We'll share it on our website as well as our social media. And speaking of social media, I've just placed in the chat links to all of our social media should you want to get to know AAF Baltimore a little bit more. Our Slack channel, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn groups, LinkedIn page. We would love to have you join the conversation wherever you're most comfortable. And if you aren't a member, well, why the hell not? We could always use more members in our industry, particularly building out a more diverse and equitable membership in an industry that I think everybody can agree still has a long way to go. It's not just the auto industry, it's marketing, communications in general. So that about does it for us. Thank you all so much for joining, and we will certainly be holding more opportunities like this in the near future.
Thank you
for having us.